Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Politdigm Podcast. My name is Red, and today I'm joined by my co-host Alpha.
Hello, everyone.
Alpha is half dead, so today it's going to be
I'm not
another.
half. I am full on destroyed.
We had to, before the recording, we had to reanimate Alpha. It's a complex process, but hey, it must be done. So today is the 30th of June. Not what the fuck, June? January. Sorry, wrong month starting with the letter J. And this week was another one of my weeks. And today I decided to talk about a topic that, surprisingly enough, I haven't talked about yet. It's mostly surprising because I like a couple, I think it was like a year or so ago, like a year and a half ago, I think. I did a whole oral presentation about this at school, and it was kind of like my first time that I really did any research or like deeper research. What?
It was your first time.
Yes, it was my first time. It was like my first time like doing proper research about like something along the type of stuff that we usually do research on for
What?
Politdigm. So the topic that I chose is the patriarchy. That's why I'm surprised we haven't talked about it, because it is a pretty big deal. And I specifically chose to talk about it based on a book. Okay, I do have to say one thing. I have not read the book. I plan to read the book on Politdigm Reads. Go check out our website.
Yeah, you plan to read the book. I don't even plan to read that, and I'm the philosophy nerd here.
And it's a book by Frederick Engels, who's one of the writers of the Communist Manifesto, and Karl Marx sugar daddy, and he wrote a book called The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and State. This book is pretty much like it's a massive deal when it comes to Marxist theory, and I watched like 2 or 3 lectures on it because I've nothing better to do. And I became absolutely fascinated by the book. I do have to say that there are some like small, like scientific shit, right, that we have proven to be slightly different that he imagined. But like his general theory still stands, right? Like there's like, all right, yeah, maybe this thing didn't happen exactly like that, but like he thought it would, but that doesn't mean that his whole concept is wrong. And at the end of the day, the article isn't about the book anyways. It's just taking that general concept that he wrote about and then applying it to the article, because the book isn't just about the patriarchy. It talks again about about the origin of the family, the private property, and the state. So there's some other stuff that we're not talking about. However, before I do get into the article, we have to do our obligatory plug. If you enjoy this episode, make sure to support us over on Patreon. If you can support us in a monetary way, make sure to check out our website, where you can find out how you can help us in alternative forms. However, if you do join our Patreon, you should also join our private Discord server, where you can get special perks to submit questions to our podcast Q&A, because at the end of each episode of the podcast, we try to answer all your submitted questions. Not all of them. If you submit 300, we're not responding to all of them, because fuck you. And and end it off, of course, make sure to to follow us over at our socials, where we like to send hate messages not hate messages, what do you call it, I guess.
You're completely alone in this.
No, I was gonna like make a joke about the thing that we did with Biden, where like Biden tweeted something out and like we just dunked on him.
I am innocent in this. That was your brainchild.
Yeah, well, that was pretty funny. I was like, he's like, I'm yes, I'm a capitalist, and I'm like, go fuck yourself. I mean, that's not what I said, but it kind of can be summed up by me telling him to go fuck himself.
Let me kiss the president of the United States.
Yeah, so yeah,
Mad with power.
go check out our the moments that we dunk on random people, because we thought that it was necessary for educational reasons. Anyways, let's get into the article itself. So,
The news.
as I said, there are, of course, some small anthropological findings, archaeological shit that we have found in the, later years. This book was written in 18, or was released in 1884, if I'm correct. I think it was the year after Marx died. And so of course, yeah, no shit, there's been, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that there's been new findings, and there's been an evolution into our knowledge, into the origin of the family, et cetera, et cetera. But the main thing that that Ingalls talks about is how that there is kind of like that, basically the family and the dynamics that we have as a group in society has gone through three main phases. We have the what I believe calls the primordial communist phase. Then we have the middle phase, which I do not remember
This
the name
was
of.
pretty metal, like for the name of a band, the Primordial Communists.
Yeah, it's a pretty metal name. And then there is the later phase, which is the phase we are in right now, and which he himself was in, which is basically the capitalist society.
Based.
So, first we must start with the primordial communism. This is pretty much the largest sum of human history. Homo sapiens are around 300,000 years old, and this phase only ended around 12,000 years ago. Of course, this phase of this sort of communal society was marked by a total egalitarian system, right? There was no men superior than women, or women superior than men. There was no differentiation. In fact, back in the day, there was only an understanding of those who hunt, those who take care of the children, and those who gather, which were primarily the people who took care of the children. In fact, this is not.
We even have the theory of when sports came to be was because these members of society who usually were tasked with hunting just kind of were not needed anymore because you could settle down and farm. So
Yeah,
they just started doing physical activity to try and pass the time and started competing against each other.
actually, had never thought about it, but that makes sense. But in fact, this is not something I actually talk about in the article, but it's a fun fact. The earliest forms of us knowing that there are trans people and that they've always been is that, usually those who did the hunting were those of the male sex. Although we have found that there was, people of the female sex who partook in hunting, and same goes for the other part, right? There was some people which usually were taking care of children were usually of the female sex, and there were some of the male sex, and this is something that we have seen in thousands and thousands of years ago, or even in more recent, more primordial societies, like for example in South America in indigenous tribes, where this was something that was very prominent, even though they weren't hunters or gatherers, but they still had like a similar sort of divide when it came to how they defined gender. It was not by like, oh, you wear this, you wear that, and that was more of like it wasn't as strict of our understanding of gender. And generally speaking, this is something I'm going to talk about later, but I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler. Generally speaking, there always has been gender. It's just that we have sort of like made it into a big deal, and back then it wasn't really it was more of a fluid thing, which is in a way would make sense. Anyways, what I was saying is that this was a egalitarian society. It was a society where there was no hierarchy based on sex or gender. However, there was one thing, which was that it was a matrilineal system, What does that mean? In these primordial communes, you would have, for example, let's say 5 adults, and for the sake of it, let's say that each there was like, I don't know, like 7 kids, maybe something like that. It's random numbers. Let's say that these adults, which is, we know that this happened, these adults just have wild orgies. Right? They do not care.
But
There is no, at this point, there is no understanding of, of a couple of couples. There is no
there is
couples.
no young love. There is only the old.
There is no couples. But like there's no relationships between only two people. There is no monogamy. These are concepts which came on much later, and we'll talk about it too. So people just fucked. People just had fun. People just had sex because it was part of, I don't know, chilling out. It was just a normal thing to do, just like any animal does. And so it was very hard to understand who exactly the father of the children was. However, when you see a baby pop out of somebody, it is very easy to know that that baby belongs to that person. So they lineage was done through the women. It was done through the mothers because it was the only way to do it. And so this didn't per se give women more power. In fact, that is why it's called a matrilineal and not a matriarchy, because it just has to do with lineage and not anything else. And usually, when it came to these communes, which is something that we've seen in much more recent examples, which is something very interesting, which was that usually it would be seen, they would have this family, right? There was kind of this group. And for example, in much more recent examples where we saw these sort of like the same type of marriage or the same type of families, which, had multiple parents in this sort of like polyamorous forms. We saw that, for example, that it was seen as taboo to be of like to have relations with somebody in your town or in your family.
Ah, Alabama is disappointed.
Because it's like, to them, it's like being like when you are a town or when you are a commune, right? Like you are one family, and so they would basically have like these, I don't know what you want to call it, like kind of like these guilds, these larger families, right? And for you
Yes.
to like create your own family, you had to like go outside your family and search
Ah,
for others,
shit. Touch grass.
which
Uh,
is
I want to say one little thing
what.
because this is something that I have a huge gripe with. I see a lot of time in more discussions, especially in school. You're like, oh yeah, these people were fucking cavemen in the Ooga Boonga sense. They were stupid, and no, these have always been people. They might have not have computers, but they could think as smartly as you could,
Yeah.
and they had beautiful rituals when it comes to life, death, love, etc. Just because we're separated by millennia doesn't mean they felt or thought less.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they always had different a different culture than us. That's obvious. That's not like a big shock. Of course, they didn't have the same language as, or us, but that's part of the culture. But they were equally as sophisticated in a form. They weren't uncivilized. I mean, of course, we have the form of saying that, oh, there's civilization, but there is like a deep misunderstanding of being civilized and being
That's
as part of being a part of a civilization. Of course, that's where the name comes from. But when you take into account that, for example, during colonialism, that civilizing a group of people was basically cleansing them of their culture and shit, you can't really say that's being civilized.
yes, my favorite activity, genocide.
Yeah. Anyways, going back to what I was saying, there was the thing of like not really. This is not something I talk about in an article, but it's just a fun fact. There are like, I think it was in Asia, which was that, but this was like not. I mean, relatively speaking, this wasn't that long ago. In the greater scale of things, and it was that we found like that there was this kind of like this interesting kind of dynamic of families, because we are so used to like the idea of like, oh, a couple is like two people, and then there's like the children, there's like the nuclear family, right? And these are like a completely different structure, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. You can even see that in apes. They think better than us.
Monkey,
Monkey,
monkey do good. Anyways,
monkey see, monkey do.
so these were matrilineal societies. Then, of course, we evolved. We evolved, maybe not for the better, but that's
Backwards.
no, I'm joking. But of course, then we stopped doing hunting and gathering. We found that we could do agriculture, and as we do agriculture, we stay in one place.
Agriculture.
There are two sort of phases when it comes to our agricultural society. We have the sort of right after we were in like this again this communist sort of form, as there's is no classes, there's no distinction when it comes to that. We still were, it was in a form, it was still a communal living, right? We were what?
Agriculture.
No, the name of
We were farmers.
farmers. There you go. Yeah, what the fuck, I had a massive brain part there. So we were doing
Portuguese
farming,
momentum.
we're doing agriculture, and basically the thing was, right, we cultivate a bunch of food, and then this food is shared equally by everybody, and that was it. There was no big thing. There was still there was still a natural lineage, and everything was great. However,
Yeah.
as things evolved, unfortunately, there was some farmers which had the really bad idea to say, I farmed these crops and I deserve them. Basically, greediness, right? This is like the first
The
examples
capital sin.
of being greedy. And these ideas have, and this is something which is funny enough. Of course, like agriculture did not develop at the same time in every society across the planet. These were things that happened at different times in different periods. And it's interesting, which it seems like all our different societies kind of had the same, like, unfortunate, like the same steps, which is that as they develop agriculture, there is this kind of like idea of like we're putting a lot of work, and which is the issue, which is that then they start developing surplus. What does that mean? That means that they produce 100 potatoes, they only eat 50, there's 50 left, and what do we do with these 50 potatoes? And the idea is whoever, grew them keeps them. But then, for example, let's say that there is like a big, like a very cold winter. Everybody is dependent of these owner of the extra 50 potatoes. Is this an example that happened? I mean, I don't know. I didn't write this down, but I mean, I'm guessing that this is probably how it went down. I mean, it is kind of logical that this is probably what happened, because this is when you start coming up with classes, because suddenly there are people who have more food than others. So suddenly there are a few people that are more dependent on the others. And I'm guessing, not guessing, this is what happens. There are some people, these groups, these people, which usually still were men. Of course, the farmers were mostly men in this phase, because again, the women were still helping the children out. We're still doing the more more work at home, and they were doing other forms of stuff when it came to farming, less hard work, I guess, because that's basically that was their ways during the hunting and gathering phase.
You are stumbling all over yourself.
Yeah, sorry.
Goddamn.
And so what happened is that there was suddenly a group of men who started being seen as these people who had more power, people who had more food. So
You're
there
all
again,
the alpha males.
so there are now suddenly there's a class of those who have the surplus, who have these extras, and there are those who don't. Then, of course, with this comes also the birth of private property, which means that, oh, if I have more surplus, that also means that I also want to have my land, my place where I develop my own things.
I mean, I also want to put in a small thing. There is also the theory that I hate saying theory because it sounds like it's not based on anything, but this is an academic theory. It's not just pulled out of someone's ass. That during the hunter-gathering times, the closest you could have to this idea of ownership was the process of having a torch or fire when it came to organizing a hunt. Supposedly, those who had fire to disposal were the leaders of a hunt. So it's once again this idea of owning something, giving you power over the rest of a certain population.
So we suddenly start seeing something brewing up. As these things grow are starting to brew up, we start having these ideas of leaders, right? Kind of just like you said, there are suddenly, all right, we have like the leader of a town, or the leader of a small commune, and these other people are now start kind of doing whatever the other person wants out of, I mean, pure innocence in a way. Because they see as, especially like, right, he owns the land. He now, feeds us with food. It's kind of like he's going to help us out, and if we do what he tells us, he's going to help us. He's going to, he's going to be our great leader. It is through this method that we start seeing the creation of what we know as great men, right? The idea of there being a great man, a great leader, those who are grouping
A
people together
smart motherfucker.
and starting movements. And as these small towns grow, and as they grow out of their communal phases, as they give more power to their leader, as their towns grow, we suddenly start seeing the first forms of cities. Not cities, not as we know them, obviously, but we start seeing these larger populations. We start, and there's suddenly a leader, right? This is basically the birth of how kings and emperors and these larger figures.
Literally that thing of apes together strong. The more people you have in a place, the more secure you will be.
Yeah. So as these things start happening, we also have a bit of a problemo, right? A bit of a problem, which is that usually these people in power, even before these larger figures start happening, men were jealous. Jealous of who? Of the women, because during this whole period, women still had the lineage. If it was men who had the private property. I'm sure women still had private property too, but if there was men who had private property, they also wanted to be able to do lineage. They also wanted to be able to have heritage, right? They wanted to be able to say, hey, here, my son, take what I gave you or what I did my whole life, and keep my legacy. For a long time, we tried to establish this idea of like having a lineage for both men and women, but it wasn't enough. Of course, there was still a discontent by these men who wanted more, who wanted, yeah, there's no other way to put it. They just wanted more.
More,
Then
more.
we can go to a more, we can take a bit of a step. So here, Alpha, you can help me with this because you're much more knowledgeable about this. But for example, how did the Greeks see women?
Oh fuck. Okay, this will tell you everything you need to know. You know Greek like pottery.
Yeah.
The symbol for kidnapping and marriage was the same. It was a man holding the hand of a woman while the woman was behind the man.
So as you can see, suddenly we have a problem. This is not something that I actually talk about in the article, but there is a period between feudalism, which is Middle Ages, and the agricultural society, which we call the slave societies. What are the slave societies? The Romans, the Greeks, because they did all their labor through slaves.
Even before those, the Egyptians, goddamn.
Yeah, the Egyptians too. I guess those would be the three most famous. Would be the Egyptians, the Romans, and the Greeks.
So those
And
fuckers.
would you know? What you want to know a fun fact? And you probably already knew this, but this for the listeners. Isn't it funny how like in the beginning, when you go like look at the archaeology done in Greece, for example, that in the beginning there was a sort of equal importance when it came to goddesses and gods, and that the further we get into their history. But when I talk about the beginning, I talk about the really in the beginning. And then suddenly we started seeing that, oh, why is there suddenly so much more importance in the men? Why is everything that we're finding out always seeing the men as superior to the women? And this is a phenomenon which has surprisingly happened in almost every religion. In fact, you want to know another fun fact, which this one you probably don't know, which is, do you know the famous line from Christianity, which is that God says that I created man in our image?
Yeah.
Why our? Have you ever questioned yourself that? Why does he say our?
I didn't even know that line specifically. So
So the reason he says our is because in the earliest forms of Christianity, God had a wife, and
yeah,
she was completely written out of the Christian mythology, right? Of the Bible.
Gio
No.
Galio Gillibrand. I wonder why.
So this is a pattern, right? There's a pattern which has happened through, not I wouldn't say every culture, but a shit ton of cultures or religions, which is that they have been rewritten, they have been altered, they've been manipulated into suddenly kind of
You were men washed.
washing out the women. So why is this happening? Why does this happen? So taking a step back to where we were before, as men wanted more power, as they wanted to keep their lineage, as men become these great figures, they want total ability to have their heritage. But here's an issue: if there is still, if monogamy is not a established thing until then, how can they know 100% that the children, born out of their wives are their children? They couldn't. So this is when the idea of monogamy starts, coming up. The idea of a man and a woman. It's a very recent idea. Then we have another issue, which is how do we enforce that? How the hell, after so many thousands of years of women and men having total, sexual liberty, how the hell do we enforce this type of mentality into anybody? You have to manipulate their faith. They had to enforce the idea that, oh, God says that it's only men and women, and that you can't sleep with anybody, and that you must sleep with one person in your whole life, and that's it. And we do that. As that happens, and as the years go by and these ideas are more welcomed, we have a sudden problem, which is that women went from being equal to men to suddenly not being as equal to men because of classes, to then getting their last sort of power taken away from them, which was that they still had heritage. So suddenly all women are, like you said, kind of the idea of the Greeks is that they're literally just a reproduction machine, nothing else. They have other than taking care of the children and creating them, they have absolutely no other purpose. However, I do have to add a bit of a parenthesis in between this. Up until, again, these ideas came up, we still didn't have the ideas of man and woman, at least not as we have them today. It is during these development of these ideas, which we started erasing the existence of there being people who aren't men and women. It's a known fact, and for those who don't recognize it or dumb, that there is, we have found evidence that in every continent there has been cultures, and there still is cultures, which always had more than two genders. There were some which had more than three. There were some which had multiple.
And gods who fluctuated between them.
This is because it is literally, I mean, even if you let's ignore what gender is. Let's purely ignore what gender is. Let's look purely at in a biological sense, without even thinking about what is inside the head of the person. There is still not just male and female, as we know of today, and we don't have as much research as we probably should of these things. The little research that we have, we know that 1.9% of humans today are intersex, which means that they don't fall between neither men nor women. This is a massive percentage when you think about it. This is almost 2% of the entire population. That means that almost 1 in 50 people is intersex. So saying that there's only men and women is dumb, which means that even in the development of gender, it makes no sense to say that they're just men and women.
And also, I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's probably going to be the African cultures or the Asian cultures." Let me remind you.
Even Europe had this.
Yeah, let me remind you. You know Norse mythology,
Yeah.
the European mythology.
Yeah.
You know Loki.
Yeah, Loki was gay as hell. Love that man.
Loki fucks as a horse, and not even as a horse, like as a female horse. Loki had a son who was also a
A wolf,
horse
no wolf, right?
and a wolf and a
Fenrir.
serpent. Yeah,
Fenrir.
Fenrir.
Yeah. So yeah, like Loki is a massive. Like Loki is a
He's
badass.
a furry and transgender and whatever the fuck he wants to be. Goddamn.
Loki is a.
You know,
It's a
he also has
gender
this myth.
fluid furry.
There's also this myth where he eats the hearts of an evil woman, becomes pregnant, and gives birth to all of the sins of the world. But also, Loki was kind of turned into the Satan analog by the people that were researching him
Yeah.
and the rest of mythology. So, Norse mythology is so cool and also so fragmented. It's Christianity destroying things once again.
Yeah. So here we have two problems. First, we have the total objectification of women. And in the process of doing that, there needs to be a solidification that there's only men and women, because it must, for this idea to be valid in their minds, they must say that there is only two parts, there's only men and women, and one of them is superior than the other. It is a total simplification of what humanity is, and they did this to uphold their power, which is bullshit.
And also that idea of just the more man distances themselves from these natural things, it's as also as ways to try to distance themselves from nature,
Yeah.
just to
I'm
become less animalistic and more civilized. End quote.
my favorite quote from probably my favorite book, which I've read, which is not many. The quote from the Communist Manifesto
Jesus
is
Christ.
the first sentence of the manifesto is a beautiful quote, which applies to so many things, which is that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Now, does this apply to this one topic we're talking about? Yes, not in a clear and like obvious way, but it does, because even though it is not a class of men and a class of women, because there still was there was still men who were, objectified, who were treated as trash, who weren't part of this higher society. Of course there still is, and there's always has been. But there was clear that there was, however, a class only of men, a class of men who were oppressing women and other men. So with the birth of agriculture, with the birth of then private property, the birth of all these different things, we suddenly have class struggle. Because this is one of the main things of this one quote, is the idea, and even Engels himself, the writer of the other book, added a footnote to this one quote, which is that it's all of written history, which is the more recent understand, right? The everything after the primordial stuff is a history of class struggle, because in a way, what he's also trying to say is that before there was even classes, there was no class struggle, because of course there wasn't. There was no classes to struggle. And only after that, only after the creation of class, has everything gone to shit. That is basically what he's trying to say. And this is one of his arguments in his book. And I have to agree with him. So holy crap, it's already been 30 minutes. And I'm not even halfway through the article.
Oh God.
So now we must focus on a topic which I called the sacrifice of women. as we said, to create these, to be able to establish this sort of fixed heteronormative. Oh yeah, because yeah, I didn't mention this before, but yeah, obviously, if we're enforcing monogamy between men and women, there's no shit that any idea of anything that isn't heterosexuality was basically like, nah, no, fuck you, don't do that. I mean, unless you were again part of the upper classes of society, like the Greeks, which then were like, yeah,
The
then we'll
Romans.
have sex with men, because
Yeah,
this
the
is one of
fucking Romans, like Caesar, the Roman legions had a chant about how Caesar would bang the wives and the men of other soldiers.
because one thing to keep in mind between during this whole period is that although in religion monogamy has always, not always, but that they supposedly say that it's always been part of their thing and that monogamy is essential, for most of history this was only applied to women. And isn't that surprising? Wow, really? Monogamy was only like a necessity for women? Because I mean, like I just said, the Greek men, the great heroes, they had sex with plenty of other men. They had sex with
And
plenty of
women,
other people. They did not care. However, women couldn't have sex with, their wives couldn't have sex with their men. Isn't that unfair? What is up
I
with
mean,
that?
you have once again back to Greeks. I'm so sorry, but you had Zeus, king of the gods,
Yeah,
and the fucker who fucked anything that was alive and had
a
equal
hole.
to or less than four legs,
Yeah, as long as it had a hole,
and
he'd figure it
and
out.
Hera, his wife,
Yeah,
the goddess of marriage and family.
yeah. Like what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like in
Also, you have Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who was caught cheating once, and was made the joke of the pantheon. It's this, and also it's this idea that the gods were not representation of perfect things; they were the representation of what was true and human. So this is how people view themselves.
Yeah, it's a total manipulation of reality, and this is
There goes gravity.
it's one of the main focuses of this article is that to achieve these ideas, we had to completely go against human nature and completely, and I have no other way to say, completely fuck our sense of what is natural and what isn't. The reality is that
Motherfucking fuck.
these ideas were, I don't know how old is, I mean, the Greeks are older than the Romans, but the reality is that these are ideas which are now thousands of years old. These are ideas which have
Right?
been entrenched, have been, have gained roots that are so thick in our society that even the most progressive people still have a hard time letting some of these ideas go. And it's crazy because all of it is only exists for one reason, which is a ruling class trying to make sure that the lower class cannot fight against them, overthrow them. It is their only goal is to establish their dominance, and this has been a categoristic
Category. Characteristics.
characteristic, sorry, yeah, that's the term, of every single dominant system since agriculture. Every single one. This has been a thing. And as the time goes by, it's only become worse because now we have, sexism, misogyny, we have queer phobia, which is, homophobia, biphobia, anything that has to do with, a general phobia and discrimination against queer people. We have, we have racism, we have xenophobia, we have white supremacy, we have, we have
We have
these.
nuclear bombs.
We have yeah, that's not exactly what I was going, but yeah, that's true. But we have this total destruction of what we see and how we view others. And in kind of my personal rambles, I like to call these the symptoms of being a victim of the bourgeois society and its propaganda, or any being a victim of any oppressive system. Because the reality is that we and I mean broadly humanity, we have been so conditioned to think of these things, which is when you start getting kind of what's the word, exposed to kind of the reality or the origins of these ideas, you start thinking, what the fuck? What are we doing? None of this makes any sense. We have been literally so brainwashed, which we can't even recognize what our true nature is. And it's awful because the reality is that there is not just men and women. That's not true. There, even from a purely reproductive system point of view, which a lot of conservative people like to point that the only thing that matters is the reproductive, the genitals. Even if we just look at genitals, there is no two genitals. We have intersex people. They are instantly they fuck up their whole argument. There is, at the end of the day, as much as we would like to say, oh, there are different sexualities, they have homosexuality, have heterosexuality. No, it's not, no, it's not that simple. We can't categorize sexualities. And one thing which a lot of reactionary people have grasped onto is that, oh, there's consistently more and more sexualities. Because yes, the
It's
best
not even
way,
that there's more, it's
the,
just we have more things to call by their names.
yeah, like the best way I can put it is like, oh, so we have the concept of infinity. Sexuality is not infinite theoretically, but let's say that it is. Let's say that sexuality is infinite. Try to define and categorize and put infinity into different little boxes. Go ahead, do your best, and you will literally come up with mathematically the result of that calculation is infinite number of boxes and an infinite number of labels.
Says error.
Yeah, it just shits itself. The calculator is going to shit itself because that's how it is. The reason why there's consistently more and more sexualities is not because there is there's a incomprehensible number of sexualities, because there is the concept of sexuality is fluid. It is impossible to categorize something which everybody experiences differently. Hypothetically speaking, if there are 8 billion people on the planet, there are 8 billion different sexualities because we all experience it in a completely. So, oh shit! I just punched my mic. I'm so sorry. We experience sexuality in a completely different way. So we have two problems already here. There's all right. So gender, the binary gender norm is complete garbage. Sexuality, as we know it, is completely dumb. Sure, for simplicity, we still to this day, even the most. Again, as I said before, the most progressive people still like to label themselves something sexually, yet it is pointless. It doesn't mean anything. It's a social construct. It doesn't mean anything. And then we come to the final issue, which is caused by the patriarchy, which is this idea that there is somehow that one sex is superior than the other. Why? This doesn't make any sense. The reality is that even if we look back again, as I said before, even if we look at the primordial communist form, there was no superior sex. There was one people that did one thing and other people that did completely different things. And we even, again, as I said before in the beginning, we have found that there was already at that time, as we know today, trans people, people who, if we can attribute that the hunters were one gender and then the gatherers were the other gender, then we must conclude that, all right, even at that point, there was already trans people, because there was people who were born with one sex, which were doing, quote unquote, the opposite, gender thing. So it's a complete made up,
Notions of asexuality were pretty common.
what did we say?
Even notions of asexuality were pretty common.
Yeah, like even asexuality is like a basic thing. Like I think
I'm
that.
gonna go back to the Greek one last time. You gotta give it to me. Come on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so basically, one of the things that happens that we know for sure that it fucking happens was during the Greek Dark Ages, where a bunch of shit didn't get recorded. But we do know one thing was that there was a pretty fucking old temple to Artemis. We're talking like 2000 BC. And I don't know if you know this, but she's known as the only woman who has never wanted anything to do with men in Greek mythology.
Yeah. Either she just liked women or she just didn't like sex.
No, she just didn't care. It's
Yeah.
such a baller. Even Athena was the virgin goddess. So there was also the idea of not wanting to bang.
Yeah, and it's like it's funny because like I was because of it I was kind of thinking of like three sexualities or three identities which people identify with which fit exactly that point of view. There's asexuality, which is you have absolutely no interest in any sexual you don't feel sexual attraction. Then there is
Sorry,
gray asexuality, sorry, which is people who wait, is it the same thing? Wait, no, I think
like
I'm
romantically, or
I think
you know
it's
this better than me.
no, I think I'm now I think I'm mixing up demisexuality, which is like that idea that you
Demi
can
Lovato.
that you can no what the fuck, which is the idea that you can only like experience sexual attraction to those who we already have a deep romantic connection to,
Yeah.
which to a point I think that a lot of us actually are that way. I think that a lot of us experience sexuality in that form. Just if anybody, if like this is a bit of a fun exercise for those who are listening, even if you don't think of yourself as queer. Have you ever thought, I could never picture myself having sexual relations with somebody that I'm not in a relationship with, and this is not because of like monogamous, reasons. It's purely because of like, no, I just wouldn't feel comfortable. It's like I think it's such like a tender, good feeling. I just feel it would feel awkward. I would feel uncomfortable. Maybe even you are a demisexual. Like that's again is what I'm saying. Like sexuality isn't like this, like these clear lines where it's like, all right, here is one thing, and on the other side of the line is one other. No, we all experience romantic and sexual attraction in completely different ways, and the thing that I hate most about this article, not the article itself, but what I hated most when writing this article and what got me most angry is at the end of the day, there is no other motivation. There is nothing behind it than just a bunch of people that want to manipulate us, want to basically objectify us, want to make sure that we are depressed, alienated, that we are individualistic because, fuck everybody else. And they want to separate us as much as possible through these different methods, through racism, sexism, all these different things, just so that we, the working class, if you will, in modern days, can't come together and kick
Uh,
those fuckers
uh,
out. It is literally the only reason why Republican parties, why right wing parties do all the shit they do is literally because if we actually put aside all those things and actually got together, oh, they'd be fucked. Oh, they would have no
fear and
tools.
illiteracy is the weapon of the dictatorships
They
and the far right.
they would have no tool against us. Before I do get into that, because that is kind of the conclusion of the article, I want to get into the patriarchy in the modern era. So, an important thing to keep in mind is that whilst the patriarchy is a very old concept, it still lives today. It is still existent. So if somebody says, "Oh, the patriarchy," for example, like we talk about a lot of issues caused by capitalism. The patriarchy is not a thing that was created by capitalism. That's not true. However, capitalism lets it live, and therefore it must die. The reality is that capitalism benefits from this system. Capitalism thrives off of these, off of these problems, these fictitious problems that it likes to make up, because capitalism creates real problems, yet it tries to consistently make up new problems so that we are distracted. I mean, right-wing propaganda loves doing this. Immigrants are the problem. This is the problem. The problem is these other guys. The problem is that your neighbor doesn't do shit. It's their only tactic. And me and Alpha have both written two separate articles on this. I wrote an article about right-wing propaganda. In fact, he just mentioned one of the things I talked about, which is that our illiteracy, our lack of education, is one of their biggest tools against us. And then he more recently wrote an article about the rise of right-wing ideology in Europe. And these two articles do a great job of talking about these very things. And in fact, I plan to write a new one in the coming week or month because I want to revisit this topic now that I've garnished more knowledge. I want to share my knowledge with the people.
Knowledge.
But the reality is that the patriarchy is a tool of the ruling class. And all these different things are, it's a tool. It's something that they use to cause, hatred between us. And the only people that benefit from it is them. And it's like, how do I put it? For example, in those two articles, we talked about how, for example, hate speech, is
Got it.
something that they use a lot to kind of trigger reactionary tendencies, right? Like they do these things, they create hate between us to purely gain votes. Because how do they do this? Again, as I said before, create fear, create suspicion between each other, and this is why I find it very hard, and maybe it's because I've been so radicalized to the left that I see anything to do with capitalism as just flirting with fascism, because damn, they love doing it. They have a hard, like, capitalism has a massive hard on for fascism, because at the end of the day, fascism is just forced capitalism. Because, like, let's say, oh yeah, capitalism technically speaking isn't forced, but it's like having a gun to your head. It's like, oh, can I have your wallet? And you're like, sure, here is my wallet. Sure, you gave him your wallet, you did it willingly, but you had a gun to your head. So it's kind of like, you did it
You really
willingly.
want
But fascism is like, you shoot the guy on the head and you take the wallet. You don't even. So it's like when capitalism is on the descent, when the capitalism starts dying, which is happening right now as we speak, suddenly everybody starts becoming really fascist, because it's the only way to upkeep capitalism. Anyways, that's a topic for a different article, where we could talk about the rise of fascism in a different form. But the reality is that this is a huge problem. In the article, I talked about the example of queer people. I have a ton of queer friends. In fact, most of my friends are queer. I don't know why, but it is the truth. And the
there's
reality. And the reality, yeah, there's Alpha, who is like the biggest cishet you could ever know. And this is a topic because of it, because I have so many close friends. It's a topic that's, I have a big passion for, because I care about my friends. I care about everybody at the end of the day. And like, right wing assholes love to use queer people, and that's been the recent topic, the recent tool, again, a tool created by the patriarchy at the end of the day, which is hyper focusing on queer people. They're selling this idea that, oh, there's only two genders. There's only two genders, and if you say otherwise, you are a degenerate. You are
That's
dumb.
usually a catchphrase. It's there's only two
Yeah,
genders.
there's only two genders, and of course, there's only heterosexuality. There's nothing else. And if you believe anything other than that, you're a degenerate, and you're a pedophile. You're a groomer, and even if at its worst, if you yourself actually don't identify with the two genders, or with, if you're not heterosexual, you are a pig. You are the worst thing that has ever happened to men.
Yeah.
And then they use these tools. They use these tools to create fake stories. Fake crazy stories to fuel their hatred. They then blame. Which is, I hate this so much. If you don't understand American politics, you can watch our previous episode that we did on it, where I talked about voting. But the reality is that both political parties of the United States are both right-wing parties. They're both neoliberal parties, one more fascist than the other, but they're both right-wing. They're both capitalist. At the end of the day, they have the exact same underlying ideology, yet they love to blame the left, as if the left existed in the United States. Yes, it does.
It's always communism's fault.
There's a couple people that are, but there's no leftist party. There's no leftist party in the United States. There isn't. Purely, I mean, how do you define left and right? It's a whole.
The Democratic Party was the far right party like 200 years ago.
Yeah, like there is like a whole discussion to have, like, whoa, what defines as left and right? And it's not like a clear and cut answer. I mean, there's great videos out there that talk about it, about saying that, like, the political spectrum is not as easy to understand it, but like the simplified.
There are only two political ideas.
Yeah, but
I'm sorry.
it's kind of the same exact concept. You're making a joke, but what you're saying is totally
Yeah.
true. But at the end of the day, usually left and right is defined by, you have the dominant system on the right and the oppressed the system led by the oppressed people on the left. That's usually how it goes, which would mean that before the French Revolution, that capitalists were on the left, which is like what, yo, crazy. Anyways, so they create these stories. They blame the left. They say that the left is enabling these so-called degenerates. This is a literal phrase that I used in the article, and they use this harmful rhetoric over and over and over again. And they create panic. They create fake stories, and people just gobble this up because again they've been brainwashed by these by the patriarchy and all these different things, and it just keeps going. It just keeps feeding.
Hating your life, hating your 9 to 5 job, and someone just comes up to you and say, "Hey, at least you're not these guys. Look at these fuckers. They're the reason everything's fucked. Go hate them."
Yeah, and
Maybe you don't have the best education or you don't have the best life, and you just go, "Yeah, yeah, I hate them too. Fuck them."
And a thing that I talked about. Pardon me. Why am I burping so much there? I apologize for the listeners.
We have this exact example with me. I fucking hate mathematicians.
Specifically, my math teacher. Fuck that guy. But yeah, as we started looking at these narratives, it is one thing came to my mind, and something that I think is very important to say is that sure, I'm sure that there are people out there who truly think that queer people are evil. That queer people are actually like these horrible figures.
Satan, they're Satan.
But let's get this straight. Whilst we cannot say with 100% certainty, because I think there are people out there who are generally that dumb, when we started looking at politicians specifically, there's no fucking way that they actually believe this shit. Because these are political parties who are lobbied, who are financed by massive corporations. These corporations are willing to pay for anything to ensure that, again, as I said before in the beginning of the episode, they want to make sure that they can protect their private property. They want to make sure they can provide, they can protect their capital. They want to make sure they can keep gaining as much money as possible. That is their only goal. So they're willing to give money to these politicians to say whatever the hell gets them votes. So when you say, oh, does Ron DeSantis actually believe that queer people are groomers? No, there's no way he does.
You can also do that with fucking climate change and big oil companies, or politicians backed by oil companies.
These people don't actually believe these things, and like, there's no way that like you can look at Ron DeSantis and say, oh, he actually cares. Huh? Oh yeah, there are always politicians, depending on no matter what, on which
on both sides.
Yeah, there's hypocrites on both sides. Of course, here we're focusing on the right because I would say they're kind of all of them. They're all hypocrites, generally because they believe in capitalism, and capitalism is a failed system, and on and on and on. Anyways, the last topic of the article, and this is a fun one, something which I actually didn't even intend to keep in the article, but then suddenly I was like, I'm going to write this small little paragraph here, and this paragraph turned into 4 paragraphs, which is capitalism and feminism on the impact of those two things on our current dynamic. So, whilst you might have listened to this entire episode of Thought, but isn't it that, women suddenly aren't just seen as, purely machines for breeding and procreation? Yeah. Nowadays, we, generally speaking, we have a different view of it. But why? Why is it that in the last 50 years, after around Reagan and these other fucks, that we started having these suddenly, feminism has existed for so long. Feminism has been a thing since like the 17th century. Like, this has been women have been fighting for their rights for the longest time. I would say that ever since there's been oppression against women, they've been fighting, for their rights. So why is it that
everyone has been fighting for their rights?
So why is it that only suddenly, so recently, that actually women got rights? And it's very sad in a way, because you could say, oh, it's because feminists finally were able to do it. I wish it were that way, and I don't think it is. I think that feminism has a place in the world, and I think it's very important. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to say, oh, feminism shouldn't exist. No, feminism has to exist. And in fact, in a couple of minutes, I will say why. But it was not because of feminism that women suddenly started getting rights. Because what rights did they get? Let's think of it. What rights did they get?
Oh,
And Alpha,
existing, being able to work.
so can you repeat that again? Just make sure that you say that really slowly, and so people can hear it and
Yeah,
think
I'm gonna
about
say
it.
it again. Being able to vote, being able to have a job, wearing wherever the fuck they wanted outside of their house, being able to choose who they marry and when they want to divorce.
So there's two big things there: voting and working. Voting, if there's more voters, easier to establish a larger group of people. You know, you can manipulate more people to fuck over. And then there's the working factor, which is the most important factor of all of those, which you said. The reason why women suddenly have more rights in the workplace,
Work.
for example, is not because of feminism, is because capitalism is so flawed. It is so shit at its own thing that it somehow is able to fuck itself over into making women, putting women in the working force. Because think of it, when in the beginning, post World War II, when neoliberalism starts showing up, and even before neoliberalism, because that shows up with Reagan. He basically is the father of neoliberalism. Throughout those years, between like the years where America truly prospered after World War II, when they were the kings of the world, they had total hegemony. Sorry, I can never say that word, hegemony, over the entire planet. When they were the greatest power there ever was, there was this like mentality of the man has to be able to work and get money for their whole family. This was a
The
thing.
man has to provide.
Has to provide. Because here's the thing, their wages was large enough to where they could provide for them, provide for their wives to have pretty good lives in terms of being able to have a lot of buying power and be able to buy whatever she wanted. And you could send your kids to college, you could buy a house, you could do all these different things, but that doesn't exist anymore. I saw a study recently which said that for there was a town, I think it was like a city like New York or something. Again, the way I'm explaining this is not very scientific, but it was a big city in America, which for the regular person, the average person to live there, they had to have 3 minimum wage jobs to live. One person, not a family, one person. So we start taking into account that the price of living has consistently gone up, that the wages has stagnated or even decreased. The reason why women suddenly have more rights is not because capitalists, the bourgeois class, suddenly were like, you know what, we're feeling nice, after all these thousands of years that we've, subjugated women and all these things. We're just feeling, our hearts have warmed up a little bit and we just want to give women more rights. No, it is because they needed women to work. Because without women working, you couldn't, and which is funny, if women didn't work and if families couldn't have a financial stability, it was less people that they could exploit for more money, both as workers and as consumers. The only reason women are in the workplace and why women suddenly have more rights is because it was the only way for capitalism to be able to keep doing their shenanigans. And that is truly depressing, because that shows that the only reason why a lot of people in the past in the US and stuff like that have gained rights is not because the capitalists finally caved. No, it's because there was a material interest behind it, because they saw it as an opportunity to make more money, and that is the only thing they care about. And it's as simple as that, unfortunately. So to kind of conclude this podcast. Why do I always make this weird mistake?
Occurs.
When we started looking back, to the beginning of the episode where I talk about Engels and not so much at the end here, we truly see, his idea, which is that ever since we have had class society, there's been struggle, there's been inequality, there's been sexism, there's been all these different issues. And that, the only interest that the ruling class has is to milk us of everything we have. In the beginning, it was generally speaking, it's always of our dignities, our labor, everything. It has changed, sure. We aren't slaves anymore in a literal sense. Yes, we are wage slaves, which is not much better. But the reality is that it's always the same shit. It's just my mom has a great analogy of this, which is that it's always the same pile of shit, but the only thing that changes is the little flies that are like flying around it. It's the
What a
same pile of
great
shit.
analogy. Your mom is a poet.
It's the same pile of shit, but it's just different flies. And it is truly that way. It's always just constantly the ruling class trying to fuck over the ruled class. And the patriarchy is just another tool. There are many tools. There are many as I said before in the episode, there are many symptoms that we suffer because of the ruling class, wanting to establish their supremacy. There are many things. And the reality is that, when we talk about, for example, feminism, and we talk about, fighting for queer rights, these are great things. And the people that do it are, brave people who are literally putting their necks on the line, mostly when it comes to the US right now. Like, people are getting shot, people are getting killed, and still having the balls to, or not, having the, still being able to go. What?
Slip of the tongue of the mind. Freud. I'm so
Freudian
tired.
slip.
Yeah.
The reality is that these people are doing brave things. They're literally, putting their lives on the line for others. This is we can only look at this as a heroic act. And I have, I myself have gone to a pride parade, and I've been part of one, and it was it was a great liberating moment, and seeing, so many people fighting for one cause, and being so loving. It is something which can only fill you with hope. And the reality is that has to keep going. Before when I talked about, like, I'm not saying that feminism needs to stop. No, because I truly agree. It must keep going. However, it is not enough to fight these issues in isolation. You can't just say, we want women to have rights. Women must have rights, and women must have rights, and queer people must have rights. Like, sure, yeah, that's true, but like, and there needs to be, you need to have a deeper understanding of where these issues even come from. And when you study where these issues come from, and I have a bit of a conspiracy theory here. It's a joke, obviously, but for example, there's like a joke, which is that, like, a lot of trans people are like either communist, anarchists, communists in general, Marxists, Leninists, basically any form that has to do with somehow anything that has to do with communism in any form. They're just they're like a lot of trans people, a lot of queer people are like hardcore lefties. And in a way, that's good, because that means that these are people who actually have put in the work in studying why are my people oppressed, and they have studied, they've read the great works of Marx, Engels, even Lenin, even though I don't agree with everything he has said and done. These were people who had great ideas, and when you start, doing these analysis of history, as Marxists put it, a materialistic, a historical materialist analysis of history, when you start realizing that, oh shit, the entirety of history is driven by a bunch of fuckos who just want more power, or just a bunch of greedy bastards, no other way to put it, you start realizing, okay, like the reason why I, as a queer person, I, as a woman, am still being oppressed, still feeling like I'm an object to a lot of people, is not because there's like some magical force making so that people think that way. It's not like there's a lot of, and I hate when people do this, there is unfortunately a lot of feminists which have this idea that men are, for example, inherently violent against women. This is bullshit. This is not true. And Engels puts it best. Men are only violent against women under a class society, and the way to stop the violence on women by men is to remove class. And the truth is that that's the truth. The reality is that we don't act the way we do. We don't act as hateful. We aren't all depressed. We aren't all feeling alienated, like we don't belong to anything, because it's the way we are, and because we're all silly and goofy and oh, we like to be edgy and emo. No, it's because there's an underlying system that is massively corrupt and massively just fucked. I have no other way to describe it. And truly, if people truly want to fight for women's rights, if people truly want to fight for queer rights, you must also fight for the abolition of capitalism. You must
People want
fight.
to fight for people's rights in general, in fucking periods, capital period. Like, if I fucking hate when people try to put other people into little boxes and say, we gotta do this to for our cause. It's not only you that gets benefited or that gets fucked over by something. It's everyone.
Yeah, and when you start realizing that, oh, so every form of discrimination, either against your skin color, even your hair color. Let's go as far as, because we gotta respect our gender friends. Even hair
Love the
color.
brotherhoods.
Gender identity, sexuality, anything that seemingly makes you different, all hatred against it is was created by a system which is thousands of years old, and that a single system as of today keeps it alive to manipulate us. It is that system which we must eliminate to make sure that we can ever establish, any sort of actual egalitarian, again, kind of going back to our primordial form, not as primordial as we would, like a new form of it, actual communism, where we actually are, where we actually don't have these inequalities. It can only be done if we don't live under a system that allows it to happen. And that is why I find it so pathetic. And this is unfortunate to say, but it's true. I find it so pathetic when I go on Threads, for example, when I go onto social media and I see these American liberals, or, as Americans like to say, the Democratic Party, people who vote Democratic, people who are so-called liberals, because all of them are, for fuck's sake. But, these libertarian people who are capitalists, right? Because Democrats are capitalists. They're all capitalists. If you are a so-called leftist, in America, which just means that you're slightly less, right-wing than the others, even those people who are capitalists, who believe in the capitalist system, then they go on the internet and say, oh, we must fight for queer rights. We must fight for women's rights. What the fuck are you doing? Your idea is your ideologies are contradicting each other. To do one thing, you must not do the other thing you believe in. And I find it so pathetic in a way to see all these people who are such big fans of capitalism then be like, oh, we must, eliminate discrimination. But it's like, boy, it is the system that you so much love that is creating it. And no matter how much you try to be like, oh yeah, I'm a feminist, I am a queer ally, as long as you don't recognize that capitalism needs to be abolished, no matter how well, no matter how good your heart is, no matter how good, no matter how good your intentions are, your ways, your method is flawed, and it will never go anywhere. And that is unfortunate, but it's true. Because you can't expect to end the patriarchy if you can't end the system that allows it to exist. And even after it, because this is the final line that I have on the article, which is even past capitalism, and even a post-capitalist society, even if it is in a socialist, form, these inequalities, these mindsets, these ideas, of brought upon the patriarchy, brought upon white supremacy, they're not going to disappear. They're not going to vanish magically right after capitalism ends. And that is what I meant by when I said that feminism and these things need to keep existing, because a post-capitalist society is not, it's not a guaranteed side effect that sexism and queerphobia are just going to end. So even after capitalism is gone, we need to keep fighting for these equalities. We need to keep, at it. We need to make sure that people are educated and make sure that people can leave behind these hateful thoughts, and so that we can actually fight for a peaceful and egalitarian society. And that is my conclusion for this episode. What you have to say, Alpha?
Next time, read the book.
Bro, I cannot read that many books at the same time. Come on, like I've literally, like, before this, it kind of contradicting myself when I'm saying death to capitalism. Like, before this episode, I was like looking at like my Amazon like cart, and I'm like looking at like these two books I want to buy. One of them is the book I was talking about, and the other one is State and Revolution by Lenin. And I'm like,
You know what book?
I want to
What's
buy
a book I want to buy?
Which one?
How to Sleep Better.
Oh, have you seen that meme I sent you? Like the woman like reading a book called How to
Yeah, that
Sleep
meme is
Better, and then she's
cool.
just knocked out cold. And I'm like, it's a good book. It's a good book.
Yeah, what's the book?
It's probably just
But
the
yeah,
most boring ass book ever. And she just went out cold. It's like, fuck, okay, the book is just bad, but it still did the job. So maybe it's good. It's like a paradox.
yeah.
Anyways, if you enjoyed this episode, and if you would like to have more of these powerful messages, which is basically summarized by death to capitalism, make sure to support us over on Patreon. As I said in the beginning of the episode, if you can support us over on Patreon, make sure to support us in our in different methods. You can check out our website. We're looking for people that can help us out on the main channel. We're looking for people to help us make TikTok clips of our podcasts and other types of content. So if you want to help us out doing that, or know somebody that can, make sure to check it out. Make sure to join us on Discord. We would love to talk to people out there. It's fun to interact with the people that watch our content, and it'll be nice to do so. And of course, if you also want to interact with us, make sure to check out our social media platforms, where we keep everybody updated on the newest uploads, new everything that we do, we announce there. So make sure to check it out there. Check us out there. Sorry, I'm also tired. I'm slurring my words a little bit. With that being said, I think that's done for this week. Anything you want to say, Alpha? A little bit of an end message, like you usually do.
Unfortunately, today I do not have an end message. I am sorry to the listeners, but I am categorically exhausted.
You are in a catatonic state.
My bed is calling me.
The voices.
The voice.
The voice. It calls for yearn for the bed.
I might not get up tomorrow. But yeah.
I wouldn't judge
Everyone
you.
for this-
Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see everybody in the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.